Did you see any response, Andy?
Yep.
So
You're coming through loud and clear.
okay, thank you so much. Originally, I was gonna speak a sentence in Chinese just to confuse everybody. I guess I will skip that part. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lei Chittister. I live in Denver, Colorado. And it is my great honor to meet many of you for the first time. And thank you, Andy and Maggie, so much for giving me this opportunity to share my experience and observations about the Chinese culture, business practices, and to help my fellow FBA sellers succeed in their new adventure. So before I start, I have two disclaimers. Number one, English is not my first language. I came to the U.S. Just about when I was 30 years old. And as much as I have been trying, I still make mistakes in grammar, mistakes in vocabulary, sometimes in context, or understanding the idioms in American English. So I ask you to keep that in mind, to focus on the content rather than on my accent or mistakes. The second disclaimer is that I don't even begin to pretend I know everything about China, history, culture, business practices. So everything I'm going to be presenting next hour or so is more generalization, is not absolute. I don't know all the answers to the questions, and if I don't, I'll find some way to try my best to answer your questions. Okay, does that sound like a good plan? Let me just talk about in the next hour and what I'm going to be covering. I'm going to start off to talk about who I am. Why do you have to listen to me? Then I'm going to share a couple of aspects about Chinese culture as a kind of the backdrop or framework for you to understand and why Chinese behave the way they behave and the way they communicate and what is the implication on your dealings with them. Then we're going to dive into a little bit about the implications on the cultural aspects, the tradition, their belief system, and so on. Then we'll talk a little bit more into the negotiation styles. I kind of borrow E.L. James' book title, 50 Shades of Gray, because it's definitely not black and white, as many of you can attest to it in your dealings so far. Then I'll talk about, some of the secrets, not really so much secrets, but really common sense in many respects on how to negotiate with your suppliers. Then I'll end the presentation with 3 practical tips. I'm sorry for the ringing in the background, just ignore it. 3 practical tips on how do you deal with meeting or communicating with Chinese suppliers, whether it's via email, on the phone, or in a real-life situation, as Andy is planning to do, taking a trip to China, meeting them person to person. And then we'll, save some time for some Q&A. I'm sure we may not be able to cover all the questions with the time constraint, but I am on the A2A Facebook group, and I'll be very happy to try to answer some of the questions after the presentation. Okay, let me just talk a little bit about myself. When I think about my career, there were 2 major events, kind of defining events in my mind. The first event happened after college. I graduated from a very good university in China, and I went to work in Beijing for quite a few years for both a Chinese corporation and a couple of international companies. And I was living the dream so to speak, making about 10 times of an average person's salary and work for very prestigious companies, you know, in the kind of the Wall Street district in Beijing. But somehow I, you know, must be my first middle life crisis. I just wanted to pursue further education, as well as probably more importantly, want to experience a different culture. So I decided that I'm going to apply to a university for a graduate school degree. And then I liquidated everything, packed up 2 suitcases, and left my family and friends behind. So that was a hard decision. Took a lot of risk and courage to come to the US. So when I landed, I basically started everything from zero, psychologically, emotionally, economically, and mentally, academically. The second major defining moment in my career was about, you know, end of 2008. After working for quite a few Fortune 500 companies, held multiple managerial positions and in multiple disciplines, and I just felt burnout. I wanted to get out. I wanted to venture out into the entrepreneurship. I thought I was very prepared mentally, emotionally, financially, but the transition was still quite hard. Was long and arduous, as many of you can probably resonate with me, that the journey hasn't been that easy. But looking back, I'm very proud to say that I made the right decision, and the rewards, it's tremendous. Not just in monetary terms, but emotionally, the freedom that I can do whatever I need to do. I'm the only one to be blamed if something doesn't happen, if I don't take massive action towards my goal. Why do you have to listen to me? Obviously, I lived in China for almost 30 years. I do have a fairly good understanding of the culture, the society, the inner relationship among peers, family, society, and in general. And on top of that, I had been exposed to a lot of contract negotiations on both sides of the aisle, so to speak. I represented Chinese companies. I also represented US or international companies on the other side. So I had witnessed a lot of discussions on contract negotiations, and definitely observe a lot of scenarios, and then I'm going to share with you in this presentation. Okay, enough about myself. Let's get into the cultural context. I thought it might be helpful to talk about the cultural context, because that's kind of the foundation for you to really understand the why and how, because I've seen quite a few posts in the Facebook group. People share their experience about, you know, Chinese, you know, present their information such way, they're not aggressive, and so on and so forth. So when I think about the cultural context, I thought about, you know, there are two, I kind of summarize as 2 C's. The first C is the concept of collectivism. It's a hard word to pronounce for me anyway. So what does this mean? It means that Chinese tend to place group goals above their individual objectives. So if you dig deep down, why do they have this mindset? This mindset is deeply rooted from 2/3 of the Chinese population are farmers, peasants. They live in the rural area, in the villages, away from major cities, metropolitan areas. So over the thousands of years, they develop a sense of codependence, interdependence among themselves. And what is the manifestation of this mindset? Number one, definitely is the team, the community is greater than the parts. The sum is greater than the parts. The second is definitely about cooperation, collaboration. For example, if one farmer has a tractor and the rest of the village people do not have this, machinery, they need to do something to the farms, and they will probably, knock on the door of Mr. Jones to say, could I borrow your tractor? And vice versa. Then some other times, Mr. Zhang might knock on, some Mr. Lee's door to say, could I borrow your combine to harvest my wheat or rice, what have you. So the other characteristic of this mindset is the loyalty they develop among themselves, in the community, and to one another. The second C stands for Confucianism. I'm sure many of you have heard people mentioning Confucius. Confucius was a teacher, was a politician, and a philosopher during many years ago. He was born in 551 BC and died in 479 BC. In his 72 years time, he was very instrumental in shaping the Chinese society, the hierarchy, and the morality. I don't know how many of you know that Chinese, it's not a nation that with a lot of religious beliefs. If you look at the 1.4, close to 1.4 billion peoples, a very small percentage might be brought up in some kind of a religious background, whether it's Catholic, Buddhism, and so on. So the philosophy or the tradition that Confucius represents in his teachings and principles are really the foundational pieces for the society in general. So it's very different from the Western country, like in the US. So what are the two important aspects of Confucius' teaching? The number one is that the respect that one should have for the elders. The same goes for the respect for your husbands by the wives, and the children for the parents, subordinate to their peers, and students to their teachers. So this is really a foundation for the social order hierarchy. And the second important aspect of Confucius' teaching is the concept of morality. Very similar to the Christian saying about do not do to others what you do not want done to yourself. So with that two aspects, obviously there are many more aspects. Initially I have Taoism there, and with the time constraints I decided to cut that one out. So the question I think you might be having by now is so what? Why are you talking about this? And what I like to draw your attention is three pairs of concepts in what you're looking at. The first one is means versus the end. I know in the Western country, or in the time I have lived in the US, and it's very typical that we tend to focus our eyes, intention, energy, and time on the very end, and we'll do anything, everything to get to the end goal. This is very different in the Chinese tradition or Chinese thinking. What they like to do is to build trust and relationships first. like Andy has mentioned multiple times in his videos, in his, posts and so on and so forth. So you might have also experienced it's very slow going when you made your first contact with your suppliers. They tend to appear to be coy or not direct. It's not because they don't want to be direct. They're not honest people. It's just the way they behave. They want to get to know you. Then, who you are, what you represent, what you believe. Is this somebody that they can trust and they can build long-term business partnership with you and do business with you? So contract, whether you sign a contract to buy 5,000 units of a product, in their mind, it's definitely a byproduct. Not that it's not important. They want to go through the process, go through the means first before they get to the end. The second pairs of concepts, it's about compromise versus absolute truth. In the United States or in the Western culture in general, we tend to think everything linear to get to the absolute truth, to find the kind of the science part rather than the art. So then in the Chinese culture, going back to the collaboration, cooperation, the greater goods, it's more important that an individual good will achieve those goals. And they are more about to create a scenario where you feel like you're winning, as well as they feel like they're winning. It's about win-win situation. It's about cooperation and competition. In fact, in Andy and Maggie's Facebook group, I've seen a lot of evidences that people are helping each other, are living proof of this mindset about cooperation, competition. I mean, I've seen many posts, and a few individuals really stand out. It's two Dales and I think Raymond Kennedy, and those people tend to be more active in a Facebook group. And if I leave rest of the people's names out, it's not intentionally, just a time constraint. A lot of people are there to help each other to win in this kind of endeavor. So keep that in mind in your negotiation, whether it's about pricing, whether it's about MOQ. The third piece is the concept of holistic versus linear thinking, as I alluded earlier when I talk about compromise versus absolute truth. So on the surface, you might have been feeling or sensing that, it's so slow, and I'm not going anywhere with my rep, and I don't know what they're talking about. How soon can I really get my sample? How soon can I get my shipment, and so on. It's very easy for us here because we want to solve a problem. We want to, get something done, check off a task from your to-do list. And on their end, it seems like they're dawdling. They're wasting your time. So just keep that in mind, that this is related to also the trust building, long-term relationship building. They want to get to know you. They want to feel comfortable and so on. So they may be thinking more of a bigger picture, holistically about, for the next 5 years, if they can do business with you, next 10 years, and long-term thinking. Okay, let's look into a little bit deeper on the Chinese negotiation style. As you can see on my slides, I divided up into two, left and right. The style, I kind of, share a few symptoms of the style or characteristics of the style. On the right are the pains and emotions that we might be feeling on the side. Number one, the first shade of gray, it's long and drawn out, as we said earlier, because they're thinking about long-term relationship. They want to get to know you. There's also on top of that, language barrier, cultural barrier, different business practices, and so on. So it seems like forever you're not going anywhere. I mean, in my own experience as well, I'm more Americanized. I tend to get impatient about, what are we talking about? I do not get to, what they're trying to say and so on. So I mean, I have the advantage of being able to jump on the Skype to talk to them in Chinese, really get some kind of clarity. But for many of you, you may not have that advantage. The second shade of gray is very subtle. Chinese people are reserved, are subtle, are more passive probably in American eyes. They're not as aggressive, as upfront as we want them to. On top of that, they're overly polite. Because the Confucius teaching, you're supposed to respect the other party, especially, majority of us might be older than the reps we're dealing with, so they tend to have this, respect for you, and plus we are the so-called foreigners. So they are polite, they don't want to say no to you, they don't want to come out being rude. So, seems like you're running circles and not getting anywhere.
Hey, Lake, if I could just
Yes,
interrupt you for 1 second. And that I
sure.
find that one to be so true. I just had my rep made a mistake, and so
Mm-hmm.
I tried to point it out, as innocently as possible. And
Right?
I thought the poor girl was gonna like, I don't know what. She just was so distraught, that because she had made the mistake, and so just over and over she kept apologizing and apologizing, and I told her it's okay, I wanted to bring it up so next time, it's okay. um but yeah, just it was, I've never seen someone that distraught over, it wasn't something that was major, but I think that's kind of talking to what you're saying there.
Thank you, Andy, for sharing the real life example. It is very true. I'm sure you have a um, very nice way of helping her, making her feel comfortable. But, it's also going back to something I haven't talked about, the pride in what they do.
Hmm.
They're trying to please you in every possible way. If they fail, they probably, take all the blame to themselves and really take it hard. Um, the third shade of gray is layered approach. Think about it when you think about peeling an onion. So every time you ask them a question, depends on how you phrase the question, how you frame the question, under what context you ask the question, you may get very different answers. I don't know, Andy, if you have experienced the situation like that, depends on you ask MOQs, and is
Yes,
that for this
yeah,
skill? Go ahead.
absolutely. No, absolutely. And it just takes time of just, asking clarifying question after question. I'm getting better at it. Like, one thing that I've noticed is like I don't try to put like more than two questions at a time. If I put down like four questions, then it
Mm-hmm.
comes back confusing. And so I try to keep my questions like at two to three minimum until I receive a reply back.
That's a very excellent approach, Andy, because then they can take it, one at a time or two at a time, rather than feeling overwhelmed because they haven't digested your first question yet. They haven't come up with an answer to the first question yet, and they probably feel bombarded if you ask them 10 at a time. And the last one, which is very, very important, I've seen it in many boardrooms discussions, that sometime you might, I mean, it's kind of harder for us because we don't see them necessarily. We don't observe the body language, their facial expression and such. But when sometimes they say yes, when they appear to agree with you, does not necessarily mean they're in agreement with you. what they're trying to do, a lot of time what they do is acknowledging whatever you're saying, your statement, what have you. But deep down, they may not agree with you at all. In fact, they might be disagreeing with you. So going back to a very critical word Andy just used is to clarify. Ask the question from a different angle. Ask it from a different way. Recap what you heard. Recap what you read in their email. Recap what they said in their chat room. And make sure they acknowledge what your summary is indeed what they intended to say. And don't sit here and assume in our own mindset that they are in agreement with you and it's good to go, because that's a very dangerous proposition, especially when time and monies are involved. Okay, so we talk about some of the symptoms and pains. Sorry, let me back up a little bit. I haven't talked about the pains. Let's summarize the pains. I'm sure many of you, if you have the microphone, you're going to jump out in agreement with you. Some of the common pains you might be experiencing are frustration, confusion, inefficiency, befuddled, clueless, didn't know, I know I've seen some posts and people saying, posted the ref's reply in the email, and on our side we didn't understand what they're saying, and we get impatient. I've seen people, were on the verge to, in real life situation, on the verge to just stomp out of the boardroom, had it. They're about ready to pull their hair out because they were just, didn't know where the conversation was going, where the Chinese was headed. So let's talk about some of the kind of approaches that you should think about or try to keep or learn to keep the mindset in dealing with Chinese. The number one on top of this pyramid in my mind is that trust. This is not unique to Chinese culture, not unique to Chinese people, but universal to every culture in the world. And trust is probably the most important foundation you want to build. And so how do you build trust? The first advice I like to share is to honor every promise if all possible. When I say promise, the Chinese take promises very, very seriously, whether it's a handshake, whether it's an email promise, whether it's verbal or legal contract. When you say something about, Cindy, I'm going to get back to you in my time tomorrow evening, try your best to honor that. Try your best to do what you promised them to do. I know not every reps honor their promises either, but in my limited interactions, most of them are very good about that. So we Chinese, myself included, take promises very seriously. I mean, in the United States, I know I have a lot of friends who will say, oh, you bump into each other on the street, or you say, oh, let's do lunch, let's do this and do that. A lot of time when people say that, they don't necessarily mean it, or even they meant it, they may not carry out, they may not honor that promise or follow through. So that's a very important thing with Chinese. Secondly, I've seen a lot of people on the Facebook group already started to do is to get to know them, bring up the Chinese New Year, and, just kind of ice-breaking conversation pieces about if they offered, they took a day off yesterday because there were some personal issues, what have you, and it's very natural for you to say, I hope everything's all right, and so on and so forth, or Google to see what city their company is, what city the factory is. Get some general senses. If the city is close to Shanghai or Beijing or Hong Kong, just ask a little bit more probing questions, kind of harmless question about their upbringing, where did they go to school, how did they end up working for this factory, and so on. So that's kind of your gentle way of getting to know them on a personal basis, to bring out the humanity in each of us, to touch, kind of trying to touch them on a human aspect of it. So the progression of trust building, in my mind, is that you start off with business dealings. Then, if you're physically there, obviously, you participate in some events and you attended some banquets. And eventually, if you really are good friends with them, I could definitely see Andy do that very easily with Andy's personality and being charismatic. And they might invite you to visit their home. They may entertain you. They may cook all the feasts for you. The second is important aspect for you to keep in mind is the concept of hierarchy. We talked about in the Confucianism earlier, the hierarchy about, there's definitely this structure in the society, in the structure in the workplace, structure in the familial environment that you want to recognize that, especially in the business dealings. Who are the bosses, who are the underlings, and who's the decision maker, who's pulling the string behind the scene. And Andy, if you ever take that trip this year, you might observe that in every meeting, in every meals and so on, nothing is random. It's very pre-arranged who's gonna sit where. Who has a view to look at the door, who has a view to look at the window, and who's sitting at the head of the table. Nothing's random. It's all pre-arranged. There's some rules with in regards to respect, whether you're a guest, whether it's a boss. The other thing is that play their game. And Andy shared with us in his video about using yourself as an underling, as if you're reporting to somebody. You're the senior purchasing manager, right? Andy in your title, so that you can leverage that you might have a kind of a fictitious structure in your organization, in your company, that if you don't want to disagree on some pricing issues, on some contractual terms, you could leverage to say, I need to check with my boss. Play the bad cop and good cop scenarios. The third piece is I put 2 Chinese characters there. Andy, I think you know what they are, right?
No, I don't actually. What are they?
It's the phrase Guanxi.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
I see you reference a lot.
Yes.
I've seen other folks in the Facebook group reference Guanxi a lot. What does Guanxi mean? If you look at the 2 characters, for some Chinese, if you look at how the characters are written, Guanxi means I know you guys cannot see me. Put your 2 hands together. I've seen Andy do that himself. Put your 2 hands together, interlink your fingers. It's like intertwined links and connections. So this is the social interconnection, social networks, not confined to just the social dealings only, that permeated in the whole society. In the West, we say, depend on who you know, right? That's kind of the same thing, except the human web is so much more important in China. It's almost important, sometimes above the law, it's above the regulations. If you have the right connection, you might be able to move mountains, figuratively speaking. So another concept related to Guanxi is that it's a phrase called 面子. I think I've heard Andy talk about 面子 as well. What does 面子 mean? 面子 mean face. Literally, it means your face. Why face? is that you don't want to do something or say something, especially in public, to cause the other party to be humiliated, to be embarrassed, to diminish their social capital, or to diminish what they are perceived by their peers, family, bosses, and so on and so forth. So that goes back to the courtesy, it goes back to the politeness and all that. So keep that in mind as far as, at some point, if you get to know your reps a little bit better, you may try to understand, who do you report to, and what is the organizational structure in your factory or company. Just get to, subtly ask that kind of question that might help you navigate through that interpersonal web in the future in your discussion. A few more tips. This one, patience, is definitely very, very important. I would put it right up there with trust. Because for one, I am not a patient person. As much as I grew up in China, I'm not very patient. I'm not very tolerant. I value my time and, my energy a lot more. I hate people wasting time, inefficient, and not get to the answer and so on. But dealing with Chinese, you want to develop that marathon mindset. You want to develop that endurance. You want to develop that stamina. You are here for the long haul. You're not here to sign a contract, don't know them, don't have to deal with them the next day. The other tip in this regard is that whatever you do, budget for more time. If you can get a task done in 1x, I would advise you to budget for 2x as many as 5x times. Because of time difference and the communication barriers and so on and so forth. And it's going to take you quite a while, initially especially. But once you get to the point like Andy with his rep, you two develop a style or communication process, you know each other quite well, and then you will get to on the more on the efficiency level. But initially, definitely, it's going to take a much longer time. So just bear with them. This next thing is, I said, maintain composure. Composure, it's more applicable when you meet somebody in person, but composure also means that whatever you feel, your agitation, your impatience, might be felt through your communications. So don't underestimate that human psychology, that whatever you say, no matter how you try to phrase it, and they might be feeling telepathically that you're getting impatient with them. The next tip is, I call it inquisition. Andy talked about earlier. Ask questions. Ask the question many, many times. Ask the question from every different angle you can think about. And ask question a few at a time, not 20 at a time. Sometimes it's the questions in writing. Don't cut it. Try to draw a picture. If you think about, a product on Amazon and so on and so forth, take a picture, grab an image, and save that picture and download it and email them with that picture. If you don't know what they're talking about, where to put your UPC, your logo on the packaging, ask them to send you a picture and to highlight, draw a circle, whatever, what they're talking about. Sometimes it all fails. Draw a picture. Pencil in a picture, use your iPhone to snap a shot of this process flow you're thinking about, and ask them to see if they have questions, if they understand what they're saying. As I said earlier, ask them to repeat back what you said verbally and in writing, especially at the end of this, deal negotiation. Make sure they know what you're talking about, the quantity, the terms, and the shipping carrier, and the packaging, so on and so forth. So take your time to do that until you get to the point that you are really confident and they get it the first or second time. The last advice I would say, to suspend your assumption and judgment. Just because they appear to be high school students, they look young, does not mean they are that young, does not mean they are 16, 17 years old. In some of my reps, I had actual conversations with, quite a few of them in their 20s, high 20s, and early 30s. And number one is that they may not post their actual picture as of today. Often you hear about the dating sites, right? People post their picture 30 years ago. They were 50 pounds lighter. So, they have their ulterior motive in that situation. But here, they may post pictures 5 years ago. The other reality is that Asian people in general probably tend to look younger. Not to say we age faster here, but they tend to, appear to be younger. So don't just assume they're young, they're immature, they don't know what they're talking about. In fact, sometimes I do test them. I say, describe the process, how you customize. For example, I was looking at a textile item. I said, if I have my own prints, my own, whatever, how are you going to implement in the manufacturing process about, my print, customize my print and so on. And she just on Skype wrote right back the process very succinctly, and she definitely knew what she was doing. Even she is a sales rep, she definitely has a very good knowledge on the production floor about what it takes to get the customization piece done. So I just urge you not to, encourage you not to judge. Suspend your judgment. The other thing that it's going back to the humanity, the human psychology, is that also like you to step into their shoes. Think about the real life scenarios. How many inquiries do they receive on a daily basis? Probably I may not be the only one. Andy may not be the only buyer that they receive a quote question or inquiry. So they might be receiving, depends on how big the factory or supplier, they may receive 20, 50, 100. The other thing is that step into the shoes, think about the life struggles they may experience on a daily basis. Do they have children? Do they have parents living with them? Do they have a very tough or unbearable boss they have to deal with? How do they commute from their house to the factory, to their office? And do they have to get on a bus, in a crowded bus, to commute an hour to get from the village to somewhere? How is the weather like? Just think about the life struggles you and I all deal with, and they are as well. So step into their shoes and kind of touch them in their heart. If you do that, I bet you the reward, the return is going to be multiple folds. Okay, last 3 tips in real life scenarios. Number 1 tip applies to whether it's online via email, Skype, chat room, and so on. Loss in translation. We talk quite a bit so far about how do you communicate. Like Andy said earlier, you want to ask fewer questions each time. You want to use very short sentences and short paragraphs. Try to make it 1 short 2 sentences in a paragraph. Try to write as if you're talking to a 3rd, 4th, 5th grader. Don't try to show off your, very fancy PhD, doctorate degree vocabulary, because they don't get it. Even though many of them learn English in high school, even in colleges. But it's very different, textbook English versus, I learned some English when I was in China, but it's very, very different than the vast context. When you live in the US, you have this interaction with real people in a real life situation. The other thing that I encourage you to do is to avoid using slang. I still remember when I first came to the US, and probably not even the first year, when I first heard the phrase, be bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. You should have seen the look on my face. I did not have a clue what it means, really. I think as much as I can gather is a cowboy saying about, be early, be bright, be alert, be ready. Andy's laughing.
Well, I'm laughing because you said earlier that I can imagine like the idioms, you come here and you just have no idea,
I know.
like an idiom like shooting fish in a barrel. You'd be like,
Yes.
what?
Yes. What? It's like the other cowboy, not that I'm a cowgirl kind of girl, but it's all hats, no kettles.
Right.
I heard that for the first time not too long ago. It's like, what does that mean? So when you actually talk to them via Skype chat room and so on, and try to speak more slowly, not to the point of you treating them like they are retarded, but speak more slowly. Some people might talk faster, and listening comprehension, in my own experience, it's the most challenging aspect of learning a foreign language, because if you read something, you can sit there and try to do it on try to comprehend, understand, but when you listen to somebody in real life situation, it just like sometimes you don't get it right away. So try to speak more slowly. So if you master all that, it means to equal to clearer communications, clearer messages. The next two tips, it's more towards, if you really take a trip like Andy is planning on, and how do you deal with Chinese in a face-to-face scenarios. The first one is handshake. Going back to why I title this presentation, bear hug or handshake. First of all, Chinese are very reserved, are not appear to be the most affectionate, expressive people. So when you meet them for the first time, just to be safe, err on the caution side to, do a handshake rather than give them a, big bear hug. They might be shocked and they might be startled, and especially it's a female rep. Some Chinese handshakes may not be that firm, so it doesn't mean they don't like you. It's just weird, and it's just their style. Maybe they're shy or whatever reason. The second one, I remember Cordelia in Facebook group or last podcast, one of the podcasts, she asked what presents, what gifts to bring. Chinese tradition that when you meet somebody for the first time, whether they invite you to their house or some business dealings, you want to make sure you bring something, not something of great value or a Rolex watch or something, but something that's thoughtful. I remember when Andy went to visit Sam Cohen in New York, I think he loaded up half of his truck with Hershey chocolates, right, Andy?
Yes.
I saw the picture, the 200 pounds chocolate bar, Hershey bar. So speaking of chocolate bar, anything that's local specialty in your region, your area will be good. Obviously, chocolates, you need to be mindful about where you're going. If you go to Hong Kong in the hot summer, bring chocolate may not be a good idea, right? By the time you get there, it might be syrupy. But some other examples of good presents, a lot of Chinese gentlemen, men, they do like to drink. So, whiskeys of sorts. Some of them do smoke as well. A few times I would stop by at the duty-free shop in your transit from one airport to another. You may want to buy a carton of cigarettes or something. It's not that heavy. You can put in your carry-on bag. Other things I bought, ties definitely, more the brand name ties for gentlemen. Good scarves. And when you buy things like it, you want to make sure they don't have a tags to made in China, right? Because you bring to them anything Western made or not showing. I don't know. Most of the textile do show where they're made. Other things like coffee table books. I live in Colorado, so sceneries of Colorado will be another very safe bet. A couple of things that you don't want to buy, you don't want to gift. One is clock. Clock in Chinese pronounced as zhong, which is the same pronunciation as zhong, means end, to end somebody's life. So it's not considered to be a very auspicious gift. Other things like knives, they're sharp objects. When even here, when we say somebody's stabbing in the back, that's kind of the same connotation. So you don't want to. Obviously, if the rep is a knife collector, that's a different situation. There's always an exception to the rule. Now let's talk about how to exchange business cards. Couple of rules. You want to present your business cards or business card with both hands. Better yet, you want to present a business card towards the direction the other party can read it very easily, upside down from your end. And the icing on the cake, if you are going to China, just spend a little bit, $10, $20, I don't care, to make a card with Chinese and English on either side. And if you need translation of your name, ping me on Facebook. I'll try my best to translate or try to get the character for you. So that's just to show your respect for the other party. The last piece is that when you receive the card from the other party, you want to make sure you put in a business card holder. I've seen here it's very common. We just put in our back pocket, like women would put in our purse or wallet. That's considered kind of disrespectful. The last thing is dress code. In my experience, obviously, it's very different in the factory or supplier's working environment, that people tend to overdress, tend to be more formal. So the first time you meet somebody like a gentleman like Andy, you probably want to, put on a little, I don't know, sports coat with some, dressier pair of slacks. Not necessarily has to be 3 pieces, suit and tie and everything. So after that, if you decide to tour the factory floor, you may ask your rep or whoever the translator might be to ask them what's the right way to dress. And that's when you pull out your Levi's or what have you. So the first time, just to be a little bit formal and to show your respect that somebody you haven't met before. The last piece, which is my favorite subject, not drinking so much, but dining. I love to eat. If you ever visit China for pleasure or for business, you would experience that Chinese are one of the most hospitable people in the world. They will go out of their way. They would do everything they could possibly can to entertain you. They will throw you, major banquets to entertain you. They will do it multiple times. So when you think about the word banquet, in a Western culture, let's say go to a steakhouse, we're thinking about 3, 4, 5 courses maximum. But it's very different in Chinese culture. And in there, they probably do, anywhere from 30 to 50 courses. So my advice is the courses typically go like this. Initially, they will have, everything has to be in even number. So 8 appetizers, whether it's cold cuts of meat, different vegetables, different nuts, and so on. They'll start with 8 cold dishes, they call it, appetizers. Then they follow with, 20, 30 other hot dishes, whether steamed, braised, grilled, and so on, different flavor, different local specialty, and so on and so forth. Then it'll end with some very light dessert, some sweet. It's not the concept of dessert we have in American. And this is the country here in American is all about sugar, right? Everything is sweet. In China, it's everything about salt, tend to be on the salty side. So my tip for you is to pace yourself. Don't try to gobble up in the initial, few courses, because you'll find yourself so stuffed at the 8th course and there's 50 more to go. You don't want to appear to be rude, not to eat this, all the latter courses. Take a little small bite at a time, taste it, pretend you really enjoyed it. Some of the stuff can be weird. You may never heard of it, you may never tried it, and might taste weird, texture might be weird. Just take a small bite and try it. And a lot of times, the host or the hostess might also dish some stuff on your plate. That's just their way of showing their hospitality. Make sure you try this very well prepared, whatever. So if they do that, don't be alarmed. That's just a way. Let's talk about ganbei. You see on the right-hand side, there's a box and there's a bottle. This is the most expensive and prized Chinese liquor in China. It's called Mao Tai. It's manufactured in Guizhou in Sichuan province. I don't know what it costs now. Several years ago, I think it cost quite a bit of money. I still have 2 bottles in my house. So Andy or whoever, if you ever travel to Colorado, Denver, and let me know, I'll make sure you taste this, because it's very, very potent with alcohol content, I think of 50% or more. There might be a lighter version, but it's still very, very hardcore liquor. You can literally, it can literally probably burn your stomach lining if you try it. It's definitely acquired taste. So in speaking, the word I have on the left say ganbei. Gan means dry, bei means glass. So when they say ganbei, it's not like you take a little small sip. They literally mean you need to drink it up, similar to the tequila shot concept. If any of you are drinkers, you know what that means. So what the dangerous part is that there's a merry-go-round of proposing toast. So the owner of the factory might be standing up to say, Mr. Slamans, it's such a pleasure to finally meet you. We're so happy you're here. Let me propose a toast to show our welcome. So you think that's a toast, right? But no, many more will follow. The secretary might get up and propose a toast. Your rep might get up and propose a toast. Mr. Zhang might do. Mr. Chen might get up. So before you know it, you wouldn't know how you got back to the hotel. Because you'd be so drunk and so miserable, you didn't know. And next day, the worst part, you're going to have a very bad hangover. So what do? Some people I've seen made up an excuse to say, oh, I got health reason, I can drink, blah, blah, blah. There are people, the more practical, realistic approach is that you pretend you drink it up, but they always, at the banquet, they're more formal, so they have the cloth napkin. So you may want to spit most of it into the napkin. You can always ask the waiter and waitress in the banquet room. They will have a gazillion of them surrounding to serve you. So you may want to ask periodically, can I have a new napkin? You can do that as a trick. If you happen to travel in a group, then you're in luck. At least you can share. You would say, Lei, it's your turn. They may propose a toast to me anyway. I've seen also my colleagues using some kind of a hangover pills. Andy, I don't know if you're a drinker, but I've
Hmm.
seen it on Amazon too. There are some pills that you could take before you go to bed and help you minimize the hangover effect next day. So the bottom line is that be prepared to experience the overindulgence in both hospitality, food, and beverages. So you don't want to appear to, I do not, personally, I do not like to use the health reason, because a lot of deals are signed, a lot of friendship are strengthened in situation like this. You want to appear that you're receptive to the culture. You want to appear you're participating. You want to appear you are enthusiastic. You enjoy, eating and drinking with them. So with that being said, if you don't remember anything at all, in my recap, I have a few circles. Definitely the society is all about harmony, cooperation, and be very, very patient in understanding, get to know your rep, sales rep or reps. Focus on building the long-term relationship, and that in the end would definitely lead to more successes in your new adventure. And I do want to say that I'm very grateful to Andy and Maggie and many others for the great community that we have built together collectively. I believe that we are all going to be successful in our own measure. Does not mean that I'll roll out 50 private label products, make $1 million. Success is not just measured by money. In many respects, it's about getting to know yourself, getting to know a different culture, getting to know a different way of dealing in business. So with that being said, Andy and everybody on this call, and I'll be happy to try to answer some of the questions.
Yep.
Andy?
Yep. That is excellent. And this is, everything you're saying, like it's kind of bringing back to me because this is where I've been living for the last year. And like those different pain points that you mentioned earlier, like I experienced all of those early on, like just trying to figure out, the process of the communication piece. So that was excellent. I have a
Thank you.
question for you, and then there are some folks that ask questions in the question box as well. My question is, help us understand. I know, like my sales rep is telling me she's excited about the holiday coming up because it's a chance for her to visit her family, and she only sees them once a year. I didn't quite understand what that meant, but I'm guessing that maybe they live in the country and like this is her chance to go visit her parents because it sounded like she lives like maybe in the city with her husband and they have to travel far or something.
Great question. I think for a lot of people, so they grew up in the countryside, in the village, but as they went to college, graduated from university, find better jobs, a better future to work for this factory or this importing export company. They may have to go thousands of miles to a different city. They'll work for the new employer. And one thing I didn't talk about is a lot of times the employers might even make arrangements for living, like the dorms kind of scenarios, right? Because they don't have the immediate family with them in the city wherever they are, and they may live in a dorm with their colleagues and so on and so forth. So they may have once or maybe twice opportunity to go back and take this long vacation, especially during the Chinese New Year. Chinese also call Spring Festival. So they may take the 7 days, 2 weeks 3 weeks, what have you, to go back and really spend time. This is a time that everybody wants to be with their family, kind of similar to our Christmas, and more so because it's three times more festive about, Christmas and gift giving and cooking and drinking and, entertaining and all that. So in your rep situation, she may, leave the workplace and go back, travel whether 3 hours or 10 hours back to the hometown. And that's kind of what I'm guessing, Andy.
Yep, excellent. Well, Carol has a question, and her question is, given the social order, does that in any way affect the business negotiation relationship between a U.S. woman and a Chinese manufacturer?
I know that this topic has been brought up a lot, not necessarily on this call. I grew up in China. I observe even my parents' relationship. It's not necessarily that they're going to treat women any differently than men. I mean, anywhere you go, there's definitely more chauvinistic type of men anywhere, in the U.S., everywhere, not just indicative of China. So I do not think so. I might have a little bit impact and differences, but overall, that if you appear to be genuine, competent, if you have the money to buy, if you're interested in the product, they'll be just as happy as dealing with you as they would with Andy, for example. The other thing I wanted to point out is that I think if you look at all the sales reps on Alibaba, I would say, venture to guess, 70% of females versus 30% of gentlemen. So why that? My guess is that Chinese or the manufacturers, suppliers, they are also trying to apply to social psychology because the women tend to be more patient. The women, if they find the women who tend to be are prettier, are more attractive, they are also leveraging the psychology on us. Because when you meet a sales rep that's a gentleman, you just think it's business dealing, right? What's the big deal, right? But if they're women, they could play or leverage their feminine side, their personality, their looks, and so on and so forth. So, Carol, I hope I answered your question.
Here's a couple questions. If you go visit, do you just bring gifts for your rep that you're dealing with? And then what about like online gift certificates, for if you want to send them something like that to China?
I personally, I mean, I was just only thinking about in-person, face-to-face meeting. But Andy, in your situation, you work with your rep for quite a while. You're very pleased with all her help. I would say right before Chinese New Year, maybe, I don't know if you can send, I'm just thinking out loud. I don't know if you can wire some money via PayPal or a different method. I know all of us don't like Western Union. In fact, I worked for Western Union for quite a few years. So a great way, if you want to take the time to send them an actual envelope, I would suggest that you buy a red envelope of some sort. Because during the Chinese New Year, it's a tradition that many people will exchange gifts, and for the kind of your subordinate or younger or children, and people tend to give them hard cash. The cash is put into a red little envelope, and the red, it's symbolic. It's a good color in Chinese culture, red and gold. And if you look at Chinese flag and Forbidden City, Tiananmen Square, you've seen a lot of red. That's why I'm using red in my presentation. So Andy, a long-winded way of answering your question. If you really want to take the time, find out the physical address, maybe mail them, a red envelope. If you have Chinatown, say in Philadelphia, and buy a Chinese card with red envelope, that's even better. And I don't know if you dare to put some money in it. So
Okay. All right, here's a question from Sharon. She says, "Is it okay to discuss family, to ask them like about their children or to try to build a relationship?"
Yes, yes, Sharon. I would probably take it as a kind of a gradual approach. Maybe start off with where did you graduate? How did you end up working for this company? And sometimes they'll volunteer. The subject will get to the point like I had one of my reps ask how old I am. I mean, it's not rude for them to ask you how old you are. Western culture, especially with ladies, you don't want to ask how old they are. Yeah, she offered, she said, I have one baby, and said, how old is the baby? Is it a girl or a boy? One subject I would definitely avoid to talk about is religion because, first of all, 96% of people do not have a religion, so you don't want to talk to them as if you're preaching to them. So yes, definitely talk about if you find out they're from certain areas in Google to see what's the specialty of the area. One of my reps, she works in Zhenjiang, which is Jiangsu province, is not too far from Shanghai. When I first talked to her, immediately I said, Zhenjiang is famous for vinegar. And that's kind of your icebreaker. Immediately she knows, you know her city, you know her area. So I would definitely encourage you to find a little bit tidbits about where they are, where the factory is, and to start that with that kind of conversation and get to know them about their family.
Question from Jeff says regarding dining, what would you do about food allergies? It sounds like he's pretty allergic to seafood and especially crab and shrimp.
That you can definitely, Jeff, make it known. If you have a better report or know your rep better or translator better, definitely make that very explicit because peanuts will be another one, right? A lot of people are allergic to peanuts. You want to make sure they know you have some health conditions and seafood is considered it's more expensive, so it's considered a very nice dish to serve you, especially along the east coast side of China. They will serve you crabs, shrimps, all sorts of weird stuff. Sea cucumber is another thing. Has anybody ever tried sea cucumber? Tastes like a rubber. It's like a big tube of rubber, kind of chewy and rubbery.
Blake has a question. Is it rude to mention that you have samples from other suppliers when you're negotiating?
Um, I don't think so, Blake. I would definitely, you don't want to come out and just say, I know what I'm doing. You could have, if the negotiation comes to the point about this rep's price is 20 cents or $5 more expensive, you could leverage to say, besides the samples I got from you, I also inquired or got a few samples from some of similar suppliers, and use that to your advantage. You don't have to be arrogant. You do not have to be rude, but this is also business, right? It's about making money. So definitely.
I'm just looking through some of these questions here. Sharon says she's a little older, a senior citizen. Should she avoid telling them her age?
Sharon, I don't think so, because going back to the Chinese tradition, the senior people, the older people are more revered, are more respected. Just because we have a few strands of gray hair or more wrinkles, and does not mean we are mentally retarded, right? And on the flip side, you may play up your wisdom, your knowledge, your whatever prior experience before becoming an Amazon seller. So I would definitely say, don't be ashamed that you are older. I'm not young. I'm not that old, but I'm not young either. So you can also tell them, you work for so and so before, you got, this experience, that experience, and so they know you're not fooling around and you know what you're doing.
Brandon has a question. Is it okay or acceptable to ever ask or to speak with a sales rep's next higher supervisor if negotiations aren't going in a positive direction? I know this relates to face saving and respect.
Um, what I would do is that I would give your rep a gentle heads up. If you appear to be at the impasse, for example, you couldn't go anywhere with him or her, I would say, would that be all right if I talk to your sales manager to see maybe she might be willing to, negotiate a little bit more, and so that I do not put you into a very, kind of a in a bad situation. So not to say I'm going over your head to talk to your boss, but you wanted to make it a genuine effort to tell her that you don't want to put her into a very bad position, and would that be all right to talk to your boss? Maybe she or he might be willing to go extra miles in pricing.
Okay, I have a quick question for you. I don't know if you can answer this or not. So
Sure.
my rep that I have a really good relationship. She is by far I'm closest with her than any of the other reps. I've asked her like and during her personal time if she would be interested in basically being my trading agent and reaching out, to other manufacturers just to see if she can, get them maybe to lower their MOQ or if she can see like what their bottom line price is. And she's been willing to do that. And so I have sent her money. She has a PayPal account, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
just trying to get an idea like on like how much money, I need to compensate her. Basically, I've been compensating her on, how much money she's saving me,
Right.
on the products. Do you have any idea, like what a sales rep might make? Um,
Um,
like if, just a sales rep for, a manufacturer that we're dealing with, like what the general, price range would be so I can get an idea, like if I'm like way overpaying her, or if I'm underpaying her.
Great question, Andy. I do not know the answer, but what I can share is that depends on regionally where this person is. For example, when I lived in Beijing, cost of living in Beijing, it's like here, right? Living in Denver versus New York City in the real estate is definitely different.
Hmm.
So the salary is kind of proportionate to that kind of cost of living in one respect. Secondly, depends on her tenure, if she's a second year rep versus a very veteran, and that's going to be very different. I will venture to say that maybe, 5,000 RMB to 10,000 RMB. I would say 5,000 RMB, which translate divided by 6. So that's what, $300, if my math work?
300 like
Oh, 800. So just assuming 5,000 RMB is her monthly salary as a sales rep. And so she will be making roughly, if you divide it by 6, that's kind of the exchange rate. She'll be making about $800 per month.
okay, great,
So
that's
just kind of
helpful.
give you, when the time comes with my reps, I'll see if there's a good timing for me to ask them more personal questions, and then I can feed back to you about the actual
Okay,
kind of a gauge.
great.
But
So
so
Dale has a question. How far can you push the negotiating to get the price down? In the US, we'll really beat each other up over price, but how far is too far in the Chinese culture?
um, there's definitely too far in every culture, Dale. But what I would say is that depends on your situation. For example, if you have 2 or 3 very good quality suppliers who would manufacture similar products, similar quantity, and so on and so forth, if you have plan B and C, you may want to push as hard as you want. But granted, you also want to keep in mind the win-win situation. You don't want to push so far they don't have any money to make. They will tell you. So if you get to the point of your rep to say, I cannot make any concession at this point, which means the negotiation is to the extreme in her autonomy, her authority, then you might be thinking about going to the next level. And also depends on how much leverage you have in terms of quantity, right? If you're ordering 100 some items, you don't want to appear to be, I am just going to be so aggressive in my negotiation. I'm going to get every dime, every penny out of this deal. But then again, if you're going to order 10,000 of a SKU, you definitely have more leverage of that. So I encourage you sometime, as much as I've talked about being patient, being understanding, being compromising, on the flip side, you will know when it's time to walk away. I turned away from one of my reps when I first contacted with her, and she, in the 5 seconds of dealing, she said, oh, it's my lunchtime, it's Chinese New Year. We're talking about early January, May, January. She was already talking about, I'm not interested in giving you the quote because it's almost Chinese New Year. In that situation, she failed my first test. I might sound arrogant here.
No, it's good.
But it's like when you find a loser, quote unquote, walk away. Don't waste your time. Because there are a lot of good people, a lot of genuine, sincere, helpful people for you to work with. So when you find a deadbeat like the rep I met or I encountered, walk away. Immediately I said, if you're not interested in doing business with me, I would find some other companies who are interested. So I walk away.
Yep, and I would say the same thing. Like there's been a few reps that for whatever reason, they just have not responded very well. And so, I've just kind of moved on to the next manufacturer.
That was the right thing to do, Andy.
Well, this is great. If I think we're going to go ahead and end. If you guys have any other questions, you can ask them in the Facebook group. Thank you so much for this information. Again, like everything that you're saying, I've experienced, during the past year. And I know for me, this is definitely how I want to build my business is I want to continue to grow those products. I want to continue to grow the relationships that I have with manufacturers. So I know the more I understand the stuff that you're talking about here, the more successful I'm going to be. So thank you so much for taking time and to coming up with this and presenting it. Thank you for being in the group. And if anyone has questions, I just ask if you could post them in the group. That would be great as well. This is going to be recorded, and I'll put that recording along with the other videos on Vimeo. Do you have much snow where you are, Lei?
Today it's really sunny. Yesterday we got probably 3 inches. I mean, I live in a higher elevation, so tend to get a little bit more snow here. But today is sunny. It's like a Colorado weather. But I want to take the last minute to thank you all for sparing an hour or so your time. I know time is the most precious commodity or asset we all have. And I also want to thank Andy and Maggie for creating the community. I also want to give a shout out to my husband because he's been my business partner, very supportive in all my endeavors. Yesterday, he even took the time from his work to test the microphone, to test the screen, make sure that I'm not going to have an episode like we had with Neil the other day. So
right.
I really appreciate all that too. So I look forward to getting to know many of you in the Facebook group and wish you much success in your adventure.
And I will say this too. I'll just put this out there. I am trying to plan a trip with Lei. We're both trying to plan it together. We're not sure how many people. We are going to open it up to a few people in the group. We're not sure the exact numbers yet, but that's something if you want to put that in the back of your mind. I think that we're going to try to go in the fall. That's the big trade show that they have there.
Canton Fair.
Yeah, the Canton Fair. So
Mhm.
we're going to try to go during that time, I believe. But if you're interested at all in that, put that in the back of your head and start saving money because I think it'll be it's going to be a really good trip. So, all right, well,
I
that's